Mrs. Mitchell? Here. We have a quorum.
Very good. Moving to approval of the agenda.
So move. Second.
It's moved and seconded for approval of the agenda. Any comments or discussion? Rachel, please collect the vote.
Mr. Ewing?
Yes.
Mrs. Sealing?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Updike?
Yes,
Mrs. Mitchell?
Yes.
Mrs. Milius? Yes. Approved.
very good. Thank you. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. Very good. Welcome, everyone. Just as a quick reminder of our mission, our vision and mission as to why we're all here. Our vision is to maintain small town values and empower each student to achieve world-class success. And our mission statement is to be a school district that engages students to learn, create, adapt, and succeed in an ever-changing world. So just keeping in mind that that's what we're here for. And that's what the business is that will occur to support that. Moving on to good news, recognitions, and announcements. Dr. Luttrell.
Yes, for this evening, we have a few core value awards being presented this evening from our Director of Special Programs, Cindy Jados is here, and she's going to be awarding those individuals. And so she will come forward and she will give us a brief overview of the rationales behind the three individuals being recognized for the core value of supportive environment. Ms. Jados.
Yes, good evening. Recognizing these three individuals from Special Services Department, they are part of our immediate team here out of our office here at the DAC. And we've got an incredible team as it is, but I'm going to tell you these individuals, we know that they are very important. Dr. Amanda Martell and Rachel Schaefer are behavior interventionists. They have both hit the ground running this year. Amanda serves the elementaries and Rachel serves the secondaries, the middle schools and the high schools. Create a very solid system for helping staff to communicate with staff, for staff to communicate need, keeping data on those things, providing the supports. They have excellent communication skills. They've really done a nice job of doing some trainings with staff, either whole group or individually, really engaging and fun. They add a lot of fun and interest to that. In fact, it's always great to watch them because staff are always totally engaged when they're there, and that's a pretty cool thing. So willing to be educated above and beyond. They become CPI trainers for us. They've done other things and willing to take anything that they think will help add value. Really building capacity for all staff in the area of behavior. And they provide those positive supports. They've encouraged a lot of risks too. They've been helpful with staff saying, hey, try this. And they've encouraged it. And through that, they've also become cheerleaders for our staff. And that's been huge and really important. So I want to recognize them for supportive environment and their work with that. So Dr. Martell and Rachel. Yeah, thank you. And then Jenny Herndon. This is her fourth year here in this role. She's been here several years at Spring Hill, but fourth year, she is IEP coach. And she has, one of the things you probably don't know is she reads every single IEP that is written in our school district. So about 600 IEPs and reviews, gives feedback, provides training. She's done several things. She works individually with staff. She'll go to them one-on-one, phone call, email. I mean, she's continually available, goes out in buildings, several points of the year. So she's there. She has worked to get compliance on our IEPs from 37%. I think our first year is what we decided, up to 96% currently. So she's worked really hard in that area and helped staff to really achieve that goal. And right now she's working on not just compliance, but helping build quality IEPs. Her area it dips into so many others, and Jenny doesn't just focus on IEPs. It dips into instruction, it dips into behavior, it dips into other things. And she's often going above and beyond, helping support all those things readily available, and she's always there for that. So again, helping build that capacity in our staff and that supportive environment. So Jenny Herndon.
Very good. You guys want to open here? We're doing one at a time. They're open. Just avoiding the camera. No, but it's. We don't need that. That's awesome. Great. Wonderful. Next up. Ready, 1, 2, 3. And did you have support? Yes. Did you want to follow? He thought he was gonna get that. Yeah. 3, 1, 3. Perfect. Nice. All right, Jenny. Ready, 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It smelled like, yes, I was like. Champagne. Smells good.
I would guess. With students, minor entries. Yeah, that's.
Then we have the video from Dayton Creek.
Okay.
And we do have a what's going on video this month from Dayton Creek Elementary School. As you know, we've been trying to highlight a different school side in many of our meetings this year. And this time it's a brief one for Dayton Creek Elementary School, which is our newest elementary that opened up in August of 21.
We have great, respectful children that are being so kind to one another and so kind to the adults here at school. Everything's going well at Dayton Creek. And we've been really working hard on making sure that we say good morning and how's your day going? And they're doing a great job.
The Leader in Me program has gone very well for special education. In the past, I always had to create lessons for social and emotional skills, and this program just hits everything that we need, and there's just an abundance of resources. So it's been a very good fit for the students with special needs.
Everything in art is going great at Dayton Creek. Recently, the 2nd to 5th graders have finished clay projects, and they are going just awesome. The kids surprise me every time with what they come up with.
Well, our vending machine is going well. We are very lucky to have a PTO that supports us, and they provide funds for birthday books.
Specifically this quarter in science, we've been doing experiments, a lot of chemical reactions and other things where the kids get to kind of process through what a fair test is. To build on that, some of our students also went to Union Station to the Greater Kansas City Science Fair and got to experience kind of what it was like to go to a larger science fair and look at different projects that other students had done across the Kansas City area.
Those are good. Those are our good news announcements and recognitions.
Very good. Thank you. It's always good to see. Especially creating that supportive environment is so critical to learning and education. Thank you very much to the award winners and to, especially when you hear the number of statistic like 37% approval, or is it approval or compliance?
Compliance.
Compliance to 96% is, it's an amazing accomplishment in a very short period of time. So thank you very much. A lot of hard work and dedication goes into that. Thank you. Moving on to public participation. No cards? All right. Moving on to the consent agenda, which consists of approval of the consent agenda items, approval of the minutes of the March 6th and March 27th meetings, clerk's report, treasurer's report, payroll and claims, personnel, the request for the debate team students to attend 2 separate out-of-state competitions. We had a presentation on that at our end discussion at our last regularly stated meeting. The Cisco networking licensing and support renewals, again, had a discussion on that at our last meeting. Library Media Center materials for Forest Spring Middle School, discussion at our last regularly stated meeting. Student transportation contract with First Student, Dr. Latrell, I think that was
March the 6th.
March 6th, a little earlier, but I see we have a couple representatives from First Student here as well. Spring Hill Middle School polished concrete flooring work. This was part of the summer activities, I believe, as well as the Spring Hill High School new shot put area. That's the consent agenda. Any questions or comments?
I was just curious, since we do have the First Student people here, if would it be appropriate for them to maybe give some feedback to us on the 2-tiered busing option that we're kind of looking at? That be appropriate, or I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but if you just have any thoughts about good, bad, ugly with it, I mean, it's something that we're looking at.
Yeah, we had talked about the pricing on that includes for next year. Whenever we first talked to First, and we said we wanted a pricing option to keep it the routes the way they are with a single tier, but then also we wanted price to know that if we wanted to transition at some point, and this was earlier last fall, like as early as next year or in a subsequent year to the double tiered routing, what that cost would look like in the form of possible savings. And so those numbers were both in there. But then after we got into, like I said, February and March, and we got those numbers, I relayed this March the 6th. I just did not feel that because of the communication that it would take already in the spring time to kind of start that process of communicating that out to parents, that next year for 23-24, the double tiered was not a routing system that I felt was going to be doable, because it entails not only just reducing your routes and saving some money, but it also, you alter your beginning and end times, whether it's K-5 or 6 through 12, that impacts staff in terms of what they're used to starting the day. Same for parents in terms of when they're used to their children getting home. I just felt we needed much more time to do that. So the contract, even though the single tier and double tiers are there, next year we would be continuing on with the single tier, but continuing to bring more stakeholders together next school year, beginning early on, to try to see if that would be doable for 24-25. But they are here, and they can, any questions about, there are savings that would be involved with that. You would have less routes, you would have less time on the bus, but there are some other factors that definitely, if it's not done correctly, you don't have a lot of stakeholders from the beginning on board to go to it, it can not go very smoothly.
So, but this contract continues with the same bus schedule that we have
For next year, yes. And for each of the 5 years, it would continue as long as we wanted it to, but anytime if we wanted to transition to the double tier, the pricing is there.
So we've built flexibility into our contract to
Yes.
have the option to go to 2-tier busing.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. After looking at it the second time, I didn't catch it the first time. Yeah.
Okay,
Good.
I didn't have any specific questions. I just thought since they're here, recognize them being here, people do have.
Any other questions or discussion on the consent agenda?
Do the last two items that have multiple bids, the bidder need to be named in the
In the agreement?
no. In the motion. In the motion. Can't think of the word.
Can you pull those up? I don't have my computer with me. Oh.
Since it's multiple bids, I'm asking, do we probably need to name the bidder as part of the motion?
Yeah.
Actually, it is.
On the recommended action.
Yeah, it's
refined.
It is.
It's under its own recommended action.
Okay,
And then
that's what I'm
the
asking.
consent agenda 701 is kind of a synopsis.
So the answer is yes, you're correct.
Okay.
Any other questions or discussion or comments on the consent agenda? Rachel, please, we need a motion and a second.
Mr. President, I move that we accept the consent agenda as presented.
Second the motion.
It's moved and second to approve the consent agenda as stated. Any final comments or questions? Rachel, please collect the vote.
Mrs. Sealing,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Updike,
Yes.
Mrs. Mitchell,
Yes.
Mrs. Milius,
Yes.
Mr. Ewing,
Yes.
approved.
Very good. Moving on to our action item for the evening is the change to the 23-24 district calendar. Dr. Luttrell.
Yes, last meeting on April the 10th, we brought some data that indicated that there was interest in moving or aligning the 23-24 calendar with the recently approved 24-25 calendar, which basically has Monday and Tuesday of Thanksgiving being attendance days for students. And so we basically brought that last month and kind of said, hey, was this something you'd like for us to look at and bring back to you? Because if we're going to do it, it needs to be done because it does impact the start of the school year in terms of what day we start, but also anticipates and impacts mainly the workday student, the teacher work days before the start of the school year. So it's something we can't wait on. And so you all at that time, the consensus was yes, bring back a version that would somewhat align closely as possible to the 24-25. And so that's what you have here. And it would basically, as we said, basically have Monday and Tuesday, the 20th and 21st November non-attendance days. You would have 3 work days at the beginning of the school year rather than 4. And then it does also take a professional learning day that has been placed at the Monday after spring break and moves that to for next year would move that to right around the last weekend in March for a professional learning day. So that's the one. And then I put in there for your own comparison purposes, the option, which is if approved, and then the one that the 23-24 calendar PDF, that's 224 kilobyte version. That's simply the version that was, or that is already in place now. That would not have the Monday and Tuesday. Those would be student attendance days. It would have the 4 days at beginning of the school year. And my recommendation would be to approve the amended 23-24 calendar so that it would align somewhat closely with the 20-25 if there's interest in doing that.
The third attachment with the questionnaire and the comments is somehow dropped out of the
Yes,
here, but my only concern was there was a couple comments about having to modify 600 IEPs.
and
I
we
just
did,
had the person in here
No.
that sounds like she knows all about that. So
yeah, and
I'd
we,
like to get the. your thoughts.
and as soon as that comment, those were addressed, I went and spoke with and said that typically in the past, because typically every year there's adjustments to the calendar. You miss a day because of weather, whatever, and typically that individual said that what typically is done is they basically send a letter in the mail to all of the individuals that have an IEP to the parents just kind of stating there's been a change to the calendar. Here's what it was, here's when, and that typically does the communication that needs to be done.
Is that from all the three changes, the 3 days of change, or is it just one of these sets of changes?
It's just in general. I mean, just to say, and this is, your prior calendar, this is what the IEP was written based upon an earlier approved version. Here, the calendar has now been amended. Here's, so.
It likely has the biggest impact on the end date. Because I think there were changes to the start and end of the calendar. That would be the biggest thing. Because the way Spring Hill does IEPs, they put a real specific date that your IEP is good through a certain date. So it's something a lot of districts ran into in the past with calendar changes. And when I talked to our director, she already has a letter prepared that they could send out and address the issue.
Okay.
Is there currently like Y care on those days?
I talked with White Care again last week. I think the only days that they would potentially look at, and I don't want to speak for them yet, but they're waiting to see what happens around Thanksgiving, because it could be that Monday and Tuesday. I think for some other districts, they provide some programming. We haven't asked them about doing that, but that may be a change that they consider.
Okay, well, and if they don't, that would be my only thing, is that there was just maybe even working with a community group or something to do some kind of an option for parents that do have to work, that may put an undue burden on them, so.
And then in our last meeting, there was some concern about the number of days off that students had during the month of March. Any
Yeah,
further
the
discussion on that?
well, I mean, yeah, when you look at it from a standpoint of the days, the non-student attendance days in March, those would still be would not change, because you're still going to have the spring break. You still have that PD day that's been after the it's always been put in there that Monday following that Monday through Friday of spring break. And so instead of students would go to school that day, but then that PD day is moved then down next year it would be moved down to the Friday, that last weekend in March, I think it'd be the 27th of March. So there's really not, but it's just the fact that March is kind of a scrunched up month because of the spring break. And then you're going to add, you would add, but it's not really it's not an additional day out. It's just moving a day of where it's located. And so instead of having 6 student attendance days together, you're going to have 5, and then you've got another non-attendance day at the end of the month.
Okay. Any other question? I think their idea of talking to Y cares, good one, having a conversation with them.
And I would tell you, they reached out to me. So I don't, again, want to speak for them until they've made decisions, but I would assume that that's something that they'll be able to offer.
Okay. Any other discussion or comments? This is an action item.
Mr. President, I move that we approve the amended 23-24 district calendar.
Second.
It's moved and seconded to approve the amended 23-24 district calendar as presented. Any final questions or comments? Rachel, please collect the vote.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Updike,
Yes.
Mrs. Mitchell,
Yes.
Mrs. Milius,
Yes.
Mr. Ewing,
Yes.
Mrs. Sealing,
Yes.
approved.
Very good. Thank you. Moving on to discussion items. First is recommendation from health professionals regarding Narcan. Dr. Luttrell?
Yes, one of the big items that's really been pressing in our society, but especially that it's kind of found its way that for schools to try to take a role in trying to help if the event it was needed. And that is having Narcan available, not that it's just be given out to anybody, but it's just more, if there was a need for it, that under an administrative professional, that it could be administered. A lot of districts in the last year have really, who had been reluctant, have been working with their county health departments to try and come up with a solution that would allow them to kind of help be a part of the solution when needed. And so at this time, we have Dr. Robinson's been working closely with our outstanding health professionals. Again, they were here a few months ago getting recognition for all their outstanding work they did with Project Adam. And so they're here this evening just to kind of give a recommendation about the direction they feel that the district should have when it comes to Narcan. And again, all we're doing tonight is just asking you to consider it, and then we would bring it back for an action item at a future meeting. But Dr. Robinson, if you want to introduce who you have this evening and give us a little synopsis of what we're going to hear.
Yeah, I'm not a health professional, so you don't want to take any of my medical advice. But this is something we've been working on for quite a while. One of my first meetings with our nurses, this topic came up because it was coming from a group of parents questioning whether or not we had access to this medication in our schools. And so we've done a lot of research. I'll let them kind of speak more to how it would impact our schools. I would tell you, we also included an agreement because part of it, we would need the Johnson County Department of Health and Environment to manage it. So there is a agreement. We're not asking for you to take any action on the agreement tonight. Greg Goheen has been involved in working with representation from the county. And so they're still working out a few details. So when it's finalized, we'll bring it back to you for action. But hopefully this is just good information to help you in being able to make an informed decision at a later date. But I'll turn it over to Lori and Adrian and let them cover the content.
I'm Adrian Barrett. I'm the school nurse at Spring Hill Elementary.
Lori Bruckner, I'm the school nurse at Spring Hill High School.
So we are here tonight just to advocate for us having naloxone. That is the chemical name. It's also known as Narcan, so I may say it both ways, but we do feel like this needs to be available in all district buildings in USD 230. See if I can work the computer. So what is naloxone? It's an opioid antagonist, which really just means that this medication would stop or reverse the side effects if someone has taken an overdose of opioids. You can see on the slides what types of opioids there are, and some of them are prescription and some of them are street drugs. But this medication would work for all of the opioids that are listed on the slide there. It helps with any of the side effects such as sedation, low blood pressure, but most importantly, respiratory depression, where people who have have taken too many opioids will stop breathing. And so this medication really kicks in to help with that. So why do we feel like naloxone is helpful here at USD 230? We all have probably heard of the opioid crisis going on nationwide, but also statewide. And I'll be honest, coming from a small community, you're like, does this really apply to us? Do we need this? So the information on the chart here does show you that Johnson County is seeing a large increase in opioid related deaths over the last 3 years. And, ultimately we want to stop the deaths, but that's not the only thing that we see with opioid overdose. So the next slide shows you about non-lethal opioid overdoses, and it's a little harder to measure that. But Johnson County Health Department uses the administration of naloxone as a measure of how many opioid overdoses there are. And you can see from 2015 to 2021 how that has significantly increased right here in Johnson County as well.
So next we wanted to talk about when we would give Narcan. So a couple of things that we would look for is there has to be a concern for overdose. You have an unresponsive patient with slow, shallow, ineffective breathing or no respiratory effort, but still has a pulse. And there's just one dose for Narcan. That's okay for children and adults. Some other things that you look for is snoring, gurgling, or choking sounds, pinpoint pupils, blue lips or nail beds, clams, sweaty, moist skin, and then a fast heart rate that progressively goes slower. When we would not give Narcan, if a person has no respiratory effort and no pulse, the Narcan would not work on them. So in that case, we would do the code and start CPR like we would with any other student in that situation. Some things that we, just have to keep in mind when we're giving Narcan. It is possible if somebody is addicted to opioids and you give Narcan, they can wake up being kind of combative. So something that you would be aware of when you're giving it. Anytime Narcan is given, EMS would be called and a report would be submitted to Johnson County Health Department. And also Narcan only blocks opioid receptors. So even if you give it to somebody that just has not overdosed on opioids, it would not harm them or help them. It would do nothing to them if they don't have opioids in their system.
So obtaining Narcan for our district, if this is what we choose to do, there is a Kansas state statute that was put in place in 2017, allowing school nurses, bystanders, and first responders to administer naloxone. And it protects us legally if we are to administer that medication. Like Dr. Robinson mentioned, the medical oversight would be through Johnson County Health Department, Dr. Ryan Jacobson there. He's done that for, I think all the districts in Johnson County have Narcan, so he oversees all of them. There are also 2 districts in Miami County that have Narcan. I think the state oversees that. We looked into the cost. It would be approximately $81 for a 2-pack, and each building would need a 2-pack. And then if it's used or approximately every year and a half or so, it would need to be replaced. And once we have the agreement with Johnson County Health Department, we would go through training with Dr. Jacobson on that. We would also then include in our yearly training every August, training for staff on Narcan administration and things that they would need to look for. And lastly, just talking about storage, there's been a lot of questions about where we would store it, and we would store it in our nurses' offices with our EpiPen boxes, so that all the rescue medicine's in the same spot. So that's it.
So you are considering the nasal spray. I know that there's an injectable also, but you're looking at the nasal spray to keep that. Yeah. Okay. I personally don't see any reason not to have this on hand. Especially with what I talk about most of the day as well. And even knowing that there have been situations. So when talking about, does this affect us even in a small town? We've had incidences in our high school. They call there's terms, trail mix, different things. There's different varieties of pills. They don't know what they're taking. And so you don't know what they're taking either. And so to have something that's a rescue medication on hand would be very important. I'm just curious, does Johnson County have any reason that they don't want schools to have it? Have they communicated that in any way? I can't imagine them saying.
No, they're advocating. Okay. They've advocated for it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Okay.
I went to a meeting with a community health meeting with Advent Health last week for their thing that they have to do every so many years to get their nonprofit status or keep their nonprofit status. And there were several school nurses there and from other Johnson County school districts, and they expressed that they do have it available. So I figured this would be coming around sometime. Also, I know you had statistics through 2021. I think that they had 2022 statistics, and it was something like 80 some people they died of drug overdoses, opiate overdoses in Johnson County, but there were like 500 that were able to not succumb because of using Narcan. So, I mean, that wasn't in schools, but that was countywide. So I could be wrong on the numbers, but it was a lot. So go back to the slide.
Go back to there were 2 different graphics. That one, oops.
Yeah,
the down one.
So that one, instead of being like between 45 and 50, I think they said it was like 80 last year. So that one goes through 2021. And then the next slide that went like 288 was a lot more.
Yeah, that slide's difficult though, like you said, because they're literally just tracking Narcan and this slide. So it isn't all inclusive.
So.
So that's why this slide might be a little off from those numbers that you were looking at, because that's all they have to go on.
Well, I don't see any reason why we wouldn't want to
Yeah.
do it. I mean, we have responsible people. Do you guys have any apprehension to your staff having it and using it?
No, I mean, like I said, we would go through training, and then we would do staff training every year on it also. So I think it would be, and, you know, if you give it to somebody that does not have opioids on board, it's not going to harm them. So I don't see any reason not to have it.
Well, and especially with the nasal spray, that's a little,
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like that's kind of a
Yeah.
easy.
Yeah.
Not that you can't give the injections. I'm completely confident that you could, but
It's
nasal spray
just
is
one
even
more
easier.
thing. Yeah.
Sounds like a great thing to have on hand. Hope we never need it.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's very compelling just to look at this graphic over from 2018 to 2021. That's not a trend that people can ignore. And what a great thing to have on hand that you never use, right?
Right.
And if you need it, then you've got it. I mean, we have AEDs in every building, right? That's worked out, so.
And at that cost at $81 for 2 doses, even if it expired quickly, and it probably does have an expiration day within the year, $81 for 2 doses is completely worth
Yeah.
saving somebody if we needed to use 1 dose every 5 years. Hopefully
Yes.
we never do.
Definitely.
So is there any protocol? I mean, we're kind of, I kind of assume this is about students, but staff, guests, if there's a sporting event and there's a
Right.
person maybe even from a visiting team or something.
Yeah, definitely would be able to use it then also.
Yeah. Similar to the AED, or we also have stock EpiPens in all of the offices that we can use on, parents, visitors, students. So this would be very similar to that.
So with the, like at the high school, they would be access to that somehow? In it like a game in the evenings?
Yes.
it's in
It's
your
the
office
nurse's
though, right?
and,
Yeah.
administration could have access to that. Also,
And
our
again,
schools-
because it's a nasal spray, people, even after hours, if it was a game or something and there wasn't, that would be a lot easier to administer. Even
Yes.
for someone who's not
Out the training.
medically trained. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
I think Adrian started to mention it.
Yeah.
But currently, I think our school resource officers have access to it currently. So if we have an event, they would also hopefully be on hand to assist.
Great. Any other questions? Or discussion?
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Appreciate your time. Moving on to discussion item of Lindenwood Road sharing agreement. Dr. Luttrell?
Yes, we've, you may not recall it because it was last fall, but we actually, have own the property that the most recent property that the district purchased a few years back. That basically, there's a development buy and the developer is wanting to, or working on, putting a road in there, which would be where right along there where if our long-term plans would come to fruition to build a school there, we want to hopefully, would want to have that road put in the way that it's going to meet our needs as well. So we've been working with that developer who's been in turn working with the city of Olathe. And we have an update on that in terms of basically we've kind of reached agreement on if and when the time comes where they would be ready to put in that street of how the contractual obligations on both their end as well as our end would be covered. And along with, possible ways to try to collect that monetary, the monetary expense that would go into that. And so, like I said, while Mr. Meek and Kylie and Phil and Doug and I and Josh have all kind of been in the loop, we'll let Mr. Elliott kind of give you the succinct version of where we're at with that.
So as I put in the narrative, the contract, we've been working back and forth. I did receive a call late this afternoon. They have one potential concern. I wrote back and I don't think the concern is there. I think the languages that they need is already in the contract, but so there could be a small tweak. And if we did bring something different back, I would point that out to you. Also late this afternoon, about 6 o'clock, I did receive A, B, and C appendixes. So I've added those to this agenda. I'll put those into the contract before we bring it back for approval, but they are all here. In short, the contract has the developer building the road. And then we pay our half of the costs associated with that. Some of the important pieces to look at is if during the project, they change what they're going to do after the project has been approved by the city, and the city says, hey, well, now you need a turn lane there. That additional cost is on, they bear that burden 100%. So we don't have to split any costs that are above and beyond the initial project. Right now, we're not going to put anything necessarily on our side as far as turn lanes. Those would be part of whatever school construction project we do, because we don't know exactly where those might be, because it would depend on what the actual project would look like or where that site would be, how the site would be developed. The other thing to keep in mind, as I put at the bottom of the paragraph, the last paragraph there, they are still working to try to make this a benefit district. As a general rule, the city of Olathe is not doing benefit districts, but when a school is involved, they are more likely to approve that. What that basically does is it lets the project be managed and designed 100% by the city. And then it gives us an alternate way to pay our portion. We could either pay it all up front, or we could pay it on a yearly installment like other benefit districts are structured. So it just gives us a little more flexibility in how we pay and when we pay. The middle paragraph identifies that if for some reason we don't have the cash reserves or a bond in play at the time the road is done, that we could then make installments, and it would be a 1% above prime rate for us to do that. The only reason we put that in there, Greg was pretty concerned that, you know, we never know year to year exactly how the state's going to fund us. And if they would, like they did years ago, talked about sweeping our balances or, you know, some of those things that they talked about, this would make it so that we wouldn't be in default on a contract. And so this just gave us the flexibility to make installment payments if we chose to do so. So any questions on any of this? I know it's a lot of information. It's been something we've been working on since the fall. And I'd be happy to answer any questions between now and the next meeting. I'm hopeful we bring it back at the next meeting. Again, the conversation I had late this afternoon did make me question whether maybe that would not be something that would be ready if they have a change they want to make that's significant at all. So.
The part about utilities, the water main specifically, will that run down alongside Lindenwood?
So it all depends on how the city and the developer plans it, but more than likely, most of the time, because of fire hydrants, and you get the utilities running as part of that project. So it is a pretty standard way to do that. They definitely do that when they do benefit districts.
So is that the main that we would tap into for any buildings, or is there?
Potentially, it depends on where the water. Yeah, I mean, that would be up to the water department.
Okay, so we may be putting in a line we may never use, or we might.
But we would have to, even if we built the road. I mean, it would be something the city would require. Okay. Mostly because of fire hydrant access.
Sure.
So I was skimming it, but let's say we don't build anything up there for a while. Would we still have to maintain that road, or?
No, it would be a city road at the end of the project. So as soon as the project's complete, the city takes ownership of the road.
Do you have estimated cost?
Yeah, it's there. It is $1,320,000. Is it this one? That's the design. I did want to point out real quick while I have this up. We did do a boundary line adjustment basically with them so that half of the road was on their side and half of the road was on our side. We did that to maintain this tree row. You can kind of see it with the little bit of a dash line there. If you're familiar with that site at all, it was the tree row that was between our property and the Bain farm. We wanted to keep that because we potentially would have sports fields and things at the school site on the other side, but also it's multifamily on the other side of that. And so it was just kind of a barrier. We chose to give them a little bit more there because we would like them to maintain the trees and not us. And then on the northern edge up there, it's single family homes next to an elementary. And so that we wouldn't necessarily care whether we had trees on our side or not. So, so just quick design element there. Let me look. I know we attached it. This one. So overall project with their estimate is 4.3 million. There are a couple of things in here that wouldn't necessarily be ours. When I was skimming down through there, some of the I don't remember which one it was now. There was an item in here that wouldn't be ours. The excise tax would only come into play during the platting process. So that was the item that would potentially be adjusted. So. And in our experience, we've had a lot of success with developers building roads because their costs tend to be less than ours when we do competitive bids. They actually have a partner in their development that is a road contractor. And so they tend to be more efficient than what we do by the time we require the bonds and the things that our bidding processes require. So.
Where would these funds come from?
Well, more than likely, we could use our special assessment fund and just levy it there. I was gonna look up and see what the cash balance is there. I want to say 300,000-400,000. And so we've got a little cash available there. We could, one mill is going to generate almost 400,000 a year. So depending on what the payment of this is, maybe we put a $500,000 in there just to have some cash flow, or, you can pay it out of capital outlay as well. If for some reason you want to pay it off at one time, depending on where our cash balances are. So we've got a few options there.
And part of the thought process is this will more than likely not be done until 2026. And so depending on where the district is on a bond, we could potentially include it in a bond as well.
Yeah, definitely use bond dollars too. Yep.
And that's assuming everything continues. The urgency on the developer's side is the city will not let them plat their entire site until there's a road sharing agreement in place. So that's the reason they're asking for it before. They're probably 8 months from actually doing that plat now because of some of the other delays that have happened. They had some challenges with Johnson County wastewater and rural water district and that kind of stuff, but.
It's about a half mile long.
Yeah, this particular section is a half mile.
Okay.
There is the potential, as I mentioned, the benefit district, the city would really like to do the whole thing from 167th to 175th in one fell swoop. So there is a little bit of an appetite. They've been struggling with a road agreement between the owners of the properties north of ours. And so this would be a way to make that go away as well. So.
The benefit district.
Yes.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to student handbook changes, 2023-2024 school year. Dr. Luttrell?
Yes, time of year where we're again planning for the next school year, and every year they ask our principals and different committees to take a look at their protocols, and first and foremost, make sure they align with our board policy. And then after that, making sure that each of our levels, whether it's elementary and then middle schools and our high school, are kind of somewhat on alignment consistent. And so we have every year a process, and as you know, we don't have major overhauls by any means of our handbooks. It just small fine tuning. And so Dr. Villarreal is here, and I know he's been working with a group of our principals and them the last couple months, and we'll give you an overview of some of those, what that process entailed. I think he even has some representatives that help serve on that process here this evening, Dr. Villarreal.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you, board. I'm excited to be in front of you today to talk about the student handbook change recommendations for the 23-24 school year. And as Dr. Luttrell said, I do have a couple of members of the change committee here that can stand for questions at the end. So Beth Cooper from Wolf Creek and Mark Meek from Spring Hill Middle, who are both part of the team. And he also mentioned process, and that's where I really want to focus our presentation on today, is on process. Prior to this year, handbook changes were done in a more independent and siloed way than we would prefer. So elementary principals typically would work together and look at what they wanted to change. And then middle school principals would just send it in to the executive assistant and say, this is what we would like to see different. And the high school would work independently as well and send in what they would like to see different. And as you all know, because you were here last year when I stood before you and talked about handbook changes, last year we went through all of the handbooks and lined them up from K through 12. So that way everything was consistent with board policy and everything was consistent with each other. We also took the two separate middle school handbooks and merged them into one district-wide middle school handbook in anticipation of Forest Spring opening next year. And so with all of that work being done last year, I worked with Dr. Robinson to put together a new process for handbook changes that I've outlined here on the screen. So what we did is we created a form that was sent out to all principals, all assistant principals, all counselors, all nurses, and the teaching and learning and special services staff members. So they had the opportunity to then go through the handbooks, go through the sections that were relevant to them, and submit any changes that they would like to see. They had 2 weeks to do that work. And from there, we had a handbook change request committee that met, and all of the people who were sent that form were invited to be a part of that committee. We ended up with about a dozen people who chose to be part of the committee, with representation from elementary administration, secondary administration, school nurses, and school counselors, teaching and learning and special services. So a robust representation group that came together to be that committee. And on the 11th of this month, that committee met and we reviewed all of the requests that came in. We discussed them. We looked to see how that worked with board policy and how that aligned across that K-12 spectrum. And we put together a summary of recommended changes that was sent out in our district leadership team newsletter that goes to all 31 administrators in the district. And now we're here today in front of you to share the results of that work. So there were 20 change requests submitted in total. And after reviewing all of those with that team, 14 of them were approved. When you look at that and say, wow, only 14 of the 20, what were the other 6? Well, some of them, most of them actually, were topics that were submitted at the elementary level and the secondary level. And so we were able to combine some of them together. So in actuality, there was only one that we decided not to move forward. Everything else was addressed or combined in one of the other changes that was happening. So those 14 changes are in the attachment in board docs. You can see what the categories are for the 14 changes here on this slide. What the attachment has in board docs is a red line markup. So anything that was added is in green. Anything that was removed is in red. So you can see what was changed from last year to this year. And I've also included the 3 different levels so you can see how that alignment goes from K through 12. And our administrative recommendation here is to take action to approve those recommended changes as presented at the May 8th meeting. And that is the end of my presentation. So now, like I said, I'm here and can answer questions. Dr. Robinson can answer questions. And we also have Beth here as an elementary representative and Mark here as a secondary representative to answer questions.
This is just a quick question on process. Is there a way that an individual teacher or other, classified staff person or parent or even a student can suggest a change? Or do they just have to go through one of these people that's on the committee or?
That's a great question. In the initial email that went out with the survey, we encouraged the people that were on that to connect with the others in their building, principals in particular, to check in with their teachers and their staff members to see if they had any recommendations for handbook changes. But I did not recommend, not that I didn't recommend it, not that I wouldn't recommend it, but I did not ask them to ask parents and students for handbook changes. I think that as our principals and our counselors and our nurses are working with our parents and students throughout the year, the changes that they might like to see would become evident. And so then our leadership would be able to make a determination on whether or not that should go to the committee.
Yep, that's fair.
What was the one change that didn't make it?
It was a change about self-administration of medication. But that's actually a state statute, so we can't change that.
Can you clarify two things for me? One, on page 4, where it says in the high school column, penalties for absences, and unexcused is crossed out. Is that whole section about unexcused absences? Because that's what it references, or is it about any absences?
So at the high school, and some of the different changes go together with that. So they made some changes in the absences section and in the tardy section. And one of those changes is looking at the number of excused absences that are permitted. And so we worked with teaching and learning, the principals worked with teaching and learning to make a determination on what that number should be. And I can't speak to this. I wish Erin was here because she would be able to speak to this better, but I think it was students have to be present for 93% of instructional time in order to show academic growth. And so that's where that determination was made. And that's where that change in the penalties for unexcused absences came from, is that there is now a process in place, or a suggested process in place, for what to do at the high school when they exceed that number of excused absences.
So that area where you crossed out unexcused, it really is pertaining to unexcused absences.
Or if they exceed the number of excused absences.
Thank you. Okay. And then the other one is hats. Hats are allowed. Yes?
Yes. The only reason I pause is because in talking with the principals, what they and the others that were part of that committee, and I can also let one of them speak to it if they would like to, but disciplinary action related to hats or hoods worn in school is taking up more time and energy than is necessary. And the actual wearing of hats and hoods is not presenting a problem. It's just the time that it takes to discipline that rule. And it was even said during the committee meeting that that rule was a little antiquated. And the reason I paused when you brought that up is because that is one that we want to quietly change. It's not, hey, everyone, wear hats.
Well, you say that, but my kids are going to be so excited.
Yeah.
So, which I think a lot of kids are, but.
And you are seeing more middle schools and high schools specifically make that change. I think in the late 90s, early 2000s, that was a pretty common thing to put that in. And there's a lot of, especially at the high school level, moving away from it.
It just surprised me. I mean, with the hood up, you can certainly wear AirPods a lot easier, and I'm surprised the teachers would be on board with that.
Yeah, and that was part of the conversation, was just with the hoods, wearing of AirPods came up, somehow using, I'm not a middle school principal, but somehow using your hoodie and pulling up the collar to vape underneath.
Yes.
So they are aware of these related issues and are prepared for some of that could come. And one of the things that we discussed as a group is that, as with anything, it's a privilege that can be taken away from a student in disciplinary action. So if we know that Allie has an issue with that, then we can say, well, Allie, unfortunately, you're unable to wear your hood.
I hear what you're saying, like maybe that it might be kind of outdated. Maybe I'm old fashioned. I don't know. I feel like in the olden days, it was more of a respect issue to not wear a hat indoors but.
I wore a hat every day to high school, Spring Hill High School. Yes, I did.
We weren't allowed to wear hats in high school, in my high school. Yeah. Neither was Andy, is that what you said? Did you say?
I think the other connection that was made in our discussion was that with a more significant focus on students' mental health, that you also have some students at times appropriately using a hoodie as an opportunity to shut out some of the sensory stuff that might be going on. And I think I'm looking to our building principals to make sure I'm not speaking out of turn, but that may be welcomed to be able to, you know, at times for a student to be able to separate and come back to class after and participate. So there were a lot of reasons why this policy was being reviewed.
How many days do we have in a semester? How many like attendance days?
I didn't know I was gonna be quizzed right now.
Math time.
Somebody else can help me with that one.
Roughly. 90.
Thank you. Roughly 90.
So I'm just thinking about this new policy on excused absences. If a student was in a sport every season and missed days, but then was also sick, they would go over the amount of excused absences that.
Mark is gonna come share a little bit about this.
And so if you look at the language in there, it's may. So I think that's a key word. As a principal, if there is somebody that is gone over that 5 days, we have that leeway to do that. But if a student is gone for an athletic event or the FFA or you pick it, that's a school event. So they're not absent for that. That wouldn't be considered an absent for that day. They're actually at a school event, if that makes sense.
I do understand that, but your policy now says participation in a district approved or school sponsored activity falls into that category.
I did read that too.
Yeah. So with the change to monitoring that number, what Mark said first was right. So there is, with the disciplinary action that would follow exceeding the number of excused absence, there is leeway on the part of the principals to make a determination as to whether or not they need to pursue that. For example, if a student gets COVID, they have to be out for 5 days. And so that would be 5 excused absences. But it's more so to keep track of or to help keep students in school, because what we've seen a lot this year in particular is parents calling in excused absences for vacations. And so we're encouraging families to take their vacations during scheduled vacation times. But and this is our discussion item today. So if you guys do have recommendations for changes or you'd like to see wording done differently, I can certainly make changes or take some of those recommendations back to that committee to make changes before it comes back on the 8th as an action item.
So here's as a parent where I would struggle with that a little bit is that my kid's in sports and they're gone and they're here and they're there. And then we're going to take a day here or they have a procedure there, whatever the situations look like, and they've gone over. The new policy would say that they may receive zeros in that daily work and maybe they aren't that discretion, that to me means that it's at the discretion of the teacher, that like the parents don't really have, there's not a real clear, like, hey, you can still make it up, you can still do this, you can still do that. I think that's where I struggle a little bit. Parents being parents and determining what's best for their kid and having excused absences, it's not. I think that's where I'm struggling a little bit, because before it was really defined by unexcused absences equals zeros and reduction in the work assignments. You know what I mean? Now it's excused or unexcused, you could still get a zero. So I think that's where I'm struggling a little bit with that. But I'd love to hear maybe some of what brought you to that conclusion.
I think I understand where you're getting at. So it's the excused, unexcused portion of it. And really when it comes to unexcused and excused, the essence of this is, at least part of it, right now, I can call my son into school one day a week for the whole year as absent. And there's really, as I'm counting them, oh, he's sick or whatever. And they're excused absences and he's missing how much school. There's just no teeth behind it. So now we're just trying to put something, hey, we're going to give you 5 days per semester, which is 10 days in a year. That's a lot of days to miss. And so when you go back to the graduation rate and absenteeism, that 10 days is kind of tied to that too. If we're going to be, I think if we did the math right, it was actually 9 days that they could actually miss and still be considered, present, or else they're chronically absent. So that's where we're trying to get to. And so when it comes to if a student is absent or not, that wouldn't be, or excused or unexcused, that wouldn't be a teacher decision. That would be an office decision. But I understand what you're saying as far as being able to turn things in, if that makes sense. So that to me, that might just be a wording thing. I'm not sure.
And if this is what the board would like, I can take that entry change and send it back out to the committee and let them know that the board would like to revisit the wording on this change. And we can look at that and see what changes the group would like to see happen. And then we can send that back out to you all before the next meeting.
I think that's the only thing, the really vague subjectiveness of knowing it. We've had these excused absences, but the work still might not be counted, as complete or whatever. So I think that's where I'd love to see a little more. This is when it's counted as this is when you will receive a zero, and this is when you will have time to complete it. Because I think that's where I'm just that word may.
I'm wondering though, so just kind of thinking out loud, it maybe it's intentionally vague because there are instances that there might be a child that's going through something that you need to have that ability to say, yes, we're still going to count that. I mean,
I understand. Yeah, you're on with what we were saying.
Yeah.
I also understand what you're saying, that as a parent, it's challenging to know and understand, because then you say to yourself, well, if my child is going through something and I would like to keep them home for a couple of days, but we're already at our allotted 5 days for this semester, are they going to get zeros in all of their coursework for that time? So I will direct our committee to this part of the discussion so they can review and hear your comments and ask them to review the language for that entry.
I mean, just like a simple example, like maybe it is some sort of mental health care, or it's a medical issue or something, or maybe they need an appointment once a month or once a week, or, who knows? I would hate to be so locked into something that you don't have the authority as the administration team to say, no, we can still turn in those assignments. You need to go take care of your child, but we also need some parameters. You can't just call them out every once on Fridays.
Yeah.
Well, and I would say that those would probably, have a doctor's note, and then that's an excused absence. So anytime you're at a doctor's appointment, we have kids that have routine appointments, that's an excused absence. So that's pretty easily done. Having come from a district that has something similar, it's a little bit of training at the beginning. But then once parents understand that, it goes pretty easy, and it really was kind of a non-issue, other than for the ones that are your frequent flyers that are going to be gone anyway. So,
will you remind me where that 95% came from? Is that like a study? Is that what that came from?
I think it was 92%, and it's the amount of instructional time needed in order to make adequate progress toward grade level standards.
I believe that 10 days is also the piece that we're required to report as chronic absenteeism to KSDE. So and theirs is from, I think, the same study. So.
And that 10 days is per year, per semester, per year.
Yeah. And part of that is because once you go over that, the amount of learning loss, trying to keep up with your peers becomes an issue. So.
And you guys track, I'm just trying to make sure you're tracking when kids are out for school activities as well, and that feeds into this. So, okay.
they're all different codes in Skyward as far as if they're excused, unexcused doctor's appointments at a FFA event, school sponsored event. They're all coded in there.
Interesting. So, okay. No, it just, I think that part of it, I just want to make sure parents still I think by adding that participation in district activities to that, like if it was just the other stuff, that would make sense, but you're adding that. So kids are out half days all the time. Track is half day every track meet. So, I mean, that really would take up almost, I'm just thinking that through, like they could hit that with just one activity. So.
And again, the intent is to keep kids in the classroom as much as possible.
Yeah.
So that way they are getting the adequate instruction they need to meet their learning targets. So one of the things that I think is confusing to you right now is that absences for activities are currently excused absences. So even though it wasn't in the handbook before, they are coded as such in the system.
Yeah.
But we'll revisit that and send out some updated language and potentially also any comments from our committee.
When is this coming back?
May 8th.
May 8th. Okay. We need to have it wrapped up because I understand you made some substantial changes last year after we approved the handbook. So we're not going to do that again. So, all right.
And just a point of clarification, we did make changes after they were approved, and so we brought them back for approval again. So we didn't change anything without approval.
Any other questions or comments on handbook changes? All right, thank you. Moving on to our next discussion item is board meeting schedule for 23-24. Dr. Luttrell.
As promised, I said I would bring you some choices instead of just giving you the schedule with the same dates as that would align with the new calendar year. So I presented 3 options. The first draft is simply as corresponding dates, which would be 21 regular meetings and 4 possible 5th Monday work sessions. And then a second draft there, like I said, basically takes the current structure, but then adds only a single regular meeting during the months of July, August, October, and November. In addition to the other 1 meetings a month in December, March, and May, which basically has a total of 17 regular meetings plus 3 possible 5th Monday work sessions. You would still have 4 meetings, of the 17 that would be at a specific school site like we've been doing. And then the third draft, which, like I said, was little bit radical, I know, it's very doable, I think, from a standpoint of many districts make it work successfully, but that's typically, it's a schedule that basically has one regular meeting per month, incorporates the 5th Mondays as a possible, if you would like, a work session, but then have each work session, if you so choose, at one of the schools in the evening. If you want to have the principal and some teachers and students there to kind of do a program, whatever, that would be available. And then you want to have a work session, talk about other topics, you could, because we do not stream work sessions anyway. So you basically have, like I said, 3 choices as is, going from 21 to 17 for draft 2, or the more traditional going to 12 with 3. And I said, no, everybody values their time. Draft 2 is a 19% reduction in regular meeting sessions from draft 1. And you saw out there, draft 3 is a 43% reduction in regular meeting sessions. And then the difference between draft 3 and 2, even, there's a 29% reduction. I do know that USD230 at one time did meet once a month, but then of course with the extensive growth that the district has experienced for years now, and with the constant growth, the constant building of facilities are definitely, and I've, in prior districts, when you're in that mode, there's a lot going on. You can't always get everything done. And I do know that now, especially with the 2016 and 2018 most immediate bond projects, pretty well all wrapped up and complete. And hopefully, while we're still growing, we know it's going to be a little bit slower growth. We're probably not looking at another bond issue, ballot measure, probably until we get into closer to the end of 24 into 25. So I really think that it's doable. It is going to mean, like tonight, and you all did, I think we did very well tonight. We had a lot of items that we discussed last meeting 2 weeks ago, that we put on the consent agenda this evening. And I think to be successful in the one, you have to use your consent agenda a bit more. But again, just like tonight, there's always the opportunity for any individual that wants to pull a consent agenda item off and make it as a discussion or an action item separately. That's always going to exist and would exist moving forward. So again, you do not have to decide tonight, but I want to shake things up and give you some things to think about. That's my part for the meeting agenda.
Any initial concerns or discussion?
I do have some just clarifications and some thoughts to this as I was thinking about it. I think that it's always appetizing to think of more time back. I think that as we look at even upcoming elections and wanting people to join the board, but I don't think that that is a deterrent at the moment. I don't think that that's not the chatter. Like, there's just too much to do. I don't think people even really realize how much there is to do until you're here. But I do think, I was looking into this with some nearby districts and asking some questions, and they really operate a lot under committees. There's a lot of committees that are then reporting back to the board. And I think that that's why they're able to have less and shorter meetings. We don't really have that infrastructure right now with lots of committees. So my concern is that we would be decreasing the information that we have currently, and I'm not comfortable with that. I think we've already had, and we knew going into it, having a new superintendent, we'd have lots of change and the meetings would change. I would actually love to see potentially or suggest a work session to talk about our meetings, like to have a discussion about how the changes that we've made, are they working? What did we do in the past that we missed? Like that, and maybe it's a longer discussion than maybe just like in the middle of a meeting. And maybe that would be a great work session to have. But at this moment, while I appreciate the thought of having a 43% decrease in time away from home and family, I don't know, without having an infrastructure built for committees, and I have concern with less information. Those are my initial thoughts.
Yeah, I think the one of the risks that you run with doing the committee work, which I would agree, that's kind of what I've heard when we've gone to sessions and they're talking about having one meeting a month, but then they also have at least 1 or 2 committee meetings a month. And then those meetings are not necessarily, as open. So people don't necessarily know about them. So then you're, doing more, it's more collaborative because you're probably involving more people in the decision-making process. But I'm not sure we're there yet. I don't know for sure. Yeah, I too would be, the idea of not having as many meetings is kind of a little attractive. But I'm just not sure we're quite there yet.
Right, so that second draft might be a happy medium between current day and getting to at some point one meeting a month. I don't know. I think there is a lot more. There are fewer meetings, but there's more committee meetings. Right? Does that make sense? So every committee has to have a board member on. And so there's
Right, so are you really decreasing the time? Right.
So the one that I
that's my
looked at in Orlando, they said that they had 7 or 8 committees and there were 2 members on each committee. So they served on, it was a lot of committee work too.
Yes.
Right. And the other feedback that I've heard about the committees too, I mean, this happens to me even with our site council. This isn't our full-time job. Sometimes it has felt very close, not right now, but it's really hard to get somewhere at 4 o'clock or during a work day. It's really difficult. And if we add a lot of committees, there has to be a board member too. We also then are we gonna ask our staff that now we need to have committee meetings in the evening? Like, I don't know how all of that looks and works, but.
I do think at some point we're going to have to look at those meetings at school buildings, just because we're going to have more school buildings than we can possibly meet at. And now it's every other year kind of that we get there. In a few years, it's going to have to be every 3rd year. Then do you keep doing those or not doing those? It is good to get out and see the meetings and you see the buildings.
I do like that part too.
Yeah.
I also I like how you said, I do think that the committees do bring collaboration. Because the last thing, none of us are here to just be yes people. Like we really want to know why we're coming to decisions, what's happening behind the scenes, what's happening in the buildings, what is the administration saying, what are the teachers saying? So I don't want to pare it all the way down that we have less information to make decisions on.
all right. Any other comments or discussion on the 3 options presented?
How did you choose the morning meetings? Just
The morning, in terms of what
which
school?
which school?
Just kind of go on that chart there, the way they've kind of tried to which school has had the longest period of time to go without.
Okay.
It's just kind of been set up that way.
We keep adding schools though, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, the clerk set that up because I was having a terrible time
Yeah.
trying to remember where we had been and where we were going. I'd like to interject one thing, if I could. Next year, you're going to see a great decrease in number of items on your board meetings. Because schools will be done. And so we can get into the nitty-gritty, some other things that you want to discuss, which will be those work sessions. If we stay with draft number 1 and we start to see that those board meetings are ending at 7:30 or 8 o'clock because we're covering those meetings faster because of less items, then next year you can look at an abbreviated schedule. That's my suggestion.
I thought you were saying you're going to bring out the policy book again.
Oh, no, when we start policy, we're going to need to work sessions like crazy.
Yeah.
All right, other comments or discussion?
So are you all wanting just to come back and draft one then? I mean, and stay where we're at with 21 meetings and 4 work sessions? That's kind of just so when we have it as an action item, it's.
And of course, those work sessions, if you don't have anything in particular to be on that work session, that can be canceled.
Right.
As long as we've built it into the calendar that they're going to be there.
That's, yes, and that's the way it is. I mean, that's the way they've been. On there, it says if warranted and if needed.
Seems like the consensus at this point is yes on draft 1. All right, moving on to any other comments or discussion? All right, moving on to possible items on the horizon that may soon be an agenda item, Dr. Luttrell.
Yes, we have the strategic plan overview with kind of the restructuring of after the listen and learn tour, and just to kind of make it more user friendly, and so a person can look at it and say, okay, this is where it's addressing staffing, this is where it's addressing daily operations, this is where it's addressing, academics. We're going to have that ready to go here on May the 8th. And then after that, well, like I said, we plan on for this next school year to bring you every other month, or at the minimum every quarter, but probably every other month, an update on one of the specific overarching categories, whether it be academic excellence, staffing and retention, operations, supportive environment, things of that nature. We also said we would bring you the graduation requirements looming along, which presents an opportunity also to go to the weighted grades transition, which would then also lead into the law day recognition. We'll be bringing you that in June. And give you a timeline of, because if we want to have the weighted grade transition and that in place for our 24-25 school year, we're going to have that timeline laid out, and we'll have to go through that process and bring it back to you all to have approval. So all that's in our enrollment materials, and that as we gear up for 24-25, which will be in December, January of this next December, January is whenever we'll have that ready to go. The Volunteer Club will be giving their annual presentation. And then, as we said, been looking at, as we head into next year, some opportunities that I'm looking at structuring for myself, some of the other members of our executive team, in terms of trying to set up some frameworks for interacting and visiting, within each of our schools on a regular basis. It will allow an opportunity, if you so chose, as a board member to come along, probably, for an hour and a half each week. But we would be planned by month, just so that if you want to have that opportunity, you would do so. Kind of have that as a topic before we head into the next school year. And then you heard last meeting also the staff retention update that kind of gave you an overview of our staffing for spring, and then currently how our overall staffing for open positions is going. And then by the time we get into late June, we'll have the second part of that update, which will basically kind of give you a summary of all our positions, how many we fill, but then also we'll hopefully have some feedback at that point in terms of possibly, just like of how many positions we did have available, how many were retirements, how many were actually left education or left the state or went to another school district, or maybe went to another position because it was a promotion to some degree. And so, and as well as, some exit interview survey possibilities. So those are just a few that will be coming up on the horizon.
I do have a quick question on the graduation requirements and the transition to weighted grades. It seems like we did a big staff kind of collaborative study on that not too long ago. Do you remember this? And they came back and they didn't want to do the weighted grades, but wanted to do the Laude recognition format as opposed to having 28 valedictorians and 45 salutatorians or whatever. So is there, what, I'm just curious as to, is something changed or is there different? I mean, there's a lot of different staff than there were then. What's kind of driving that decision, or are other people doing it? So just curious.
The way to grade conversation is from my day one here. I mean, that came up many times in conversations on the Listen and Learn tour from parents. And then also in speaking with different administrators within the district, especially at the secondary level, they have said the weighted grades piece is definitely something that they wanted to transition into because of the fact, just to kind of basically make sure that a student that is taking the more rigorous courses, you know, that they're showing some benefit, you know, of that. And so
I guess I'm just kind of curious as to why it wasn't being recommended before, and now it is being recommended, and maybe you don't know.
I know, and again, without, I think it was just the timing of it. Because when you go into something like that, you've got to make sure that, because there will be people with strong opinions, and I think that the timing may not have been the best, you know, for the leadership at the time to feel that they needed to bring it forward. But I know that, but yes, there's been a committee in the past that has worked on this, because as we've talked about putting together a timeline, they have said the work was all done 2 or 3 years ago, and it's just now needs a point of kind of pulling it out, dusting off, and kind of doing it, because they had it ready to go, and then it kind of was put on pause.
I know there were some secondary, especially high school teachers that were really, and counselors that were really hoping for that. But I think that potentially, I can't speak for sure, but we have a new administration that might be open to different possibilities, and maybe the old administration had their own reasons to say no, but
The only thing I was gonna add is in conversations with Mr. Williams, it sounds like this was a topic last year with the high school site council. And it kind of built, so it may be something that was addressed 2 or 3 years ago, but came back up through their site council conversation. And my understanding right now is that staff are on board and supportive of the change, but he could probably speak more to where the high school is. But I think it was a site council issue last year.
Moving on to Board of Education member reports. So report outs. This is where I would remind us all that a individual Google Docs have been created to put up our experiences, action items, ideas, thoughts from the national conference that we want to pull everybody together, and then Rachel will pull them together, create a PDF, and then we can publish it. So it's important that we bring that back.
I attended the high school site council meeting last week.
All right.
A lot of talk about the Kauffman Foundation, real world learning, and the MTSS, and they're implementing like a 3-week plan to help place kids in like an intensive study a couple times a week to help with those tiers that need that extra support. So really great. We always get done right when the kids are coming, because it's a morning site council meeting. So we talked a lot about real world learning and CTE and things like that. So it's exciting to hear parents, and then there's teachers that come to that as well. Just their interest in it and where it's going, and lots on the horizon there. And I attended the prom red carpet on Saturday, and it was really great. I'd never been, and it was really wonderful seeing those kids. And then I peeked into the actual prom, and it looked like a really great time. So I hope all the kids had a wonderful and safe evening.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. Any other reports? All right, moving on to superintendent report, Dr. Latrell.
The legislative session is still underway. They've been in recess. They pick back up this week. So there should be what we're told, a lot of the legislation, especially the budget legislation, the education budget piece should be decided very quickly. I know that again, the current year funding option, even though it's been modified a bit, it's the component that we were most wanting, is still alive at this juncture. We'll have to wait and see how that holds out. And then, of course, we also, another one that's huge for USD230 in many districts is the increase in the base state aid per pupil, the COLA, especially with the inflation in that, whether that's going to find its way in or not, or hit the level that state statute dictates. So we'll kind of keep an eye on that, but USD230 would definitely benefit from both of the current year as well as, of course, the base state aid per pupil. 1 and 2 would be really good, would be good. Both would be really good. Not getting either one is going to be challenging. The Education Foundation Golf Tournament is next Monday at Sycamore Ridge. We've got most of our teams are all, I think it's full in terms of the teams that are registered and paid. Hopefully we'll have good weather for that. Last year it was bitter cold with wind and rain. Staff Appreciation Week is May through the 12th. And if you would like to be available to assist, to go some of the school sites and help give our staff, a smile and a hand, a hug, a handshake, appreciation for their work. I'm sure that would be well received if you're able. We did have made available for you if you're able any of those dates and times. We'd love to have you. And but if you can't, again, we understand that as well. But I think giving our staff, a small gesture during that week is the least we can do, and will go a long way. And then graduation for the class of 2023 from Springer High School is on the 20th of May. And again, if you plan to attend, please let Mrs. Henderson or I know so that we can RSVP and make sure that you get proper information and we get you in the loop on specific protocols for that day. That's my superintendent's report.
Very good, thank you. We do need an executive session this evening.
How much time do we need?
20 minutes. No later than 9. But if you start at 8:45, we should be done by 9:05, I would think.
Mr. President, I move that the board recess to executive session for the purpose of discussing personnel matters of non-elected personnel to protect the privacy interests of an identifiable individual under coma. Those to be in the session include Board of Education members, Superintendent of Schools, Assistant Superintendent of Schools, and administrators as requested. The executive session will begin at 8:45 and with the open meeting resuming no later than 9:15 at this place.
Second.
Moved and seconded and move to executive session for the purpose of discussing personnel matters, non-elected personnel under coma. Rachel, please collect the vote.
Mr. Updike?
Yes.
Mrs. Mitchell?
Yes.
Mrs. Milius?
Yes.
Mr. Ewing?
Yes.
Mrs. Sealing?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Approved.
we're back in session. We do have an action item.
Mr. President, I move that the board approve the Timber Sage Elementary principal recommendation for the 2023-2024 school year.
The second the motion.
It's moved and seconded to approve Timber Sage Elementary School principal recommendation for the 23-24 school year. Any final discussion or comment? Rachel, please collect the vote.
Mrs. Mitchell,
Yes.
Mrs. Milius,
Yes.
Mr. Ewing,
Yes.
Mrs. Sealing,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Updike.
Yes.